Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I had a very interesting conversation with someone the other day. He was very pessimistic about DOGE and what was happening with the transparency that Elon Musk is heading up with the federal government and exposing a lot of fraud. This gentleman didn't think that it was going to be very successful. He didn't think that Doge was actually even a good thing, that they were just going to stuff money into the pockets of Donald Trump and others. Anyway, it was kind of took me by surprise a little bit because, to be honest with you, I don't see anything wrong with Doge. In fact, I am almost giddy on a daily basis seeing what they have uncovered each and every day. But that's not necessarily the thinking of some people. And in fact, Ed Kilgore, who writes for the New York Intelligencer, wrote back on the 15th of this month that to the casual eye, or to the terrified civilian servant fearing a sudden life-wrecking email, the modus operandi of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency enterprise appears a model of speed and scary technological wizardry. With the tools he and his hand-picked underlings appear to have uniquely mastered, Doge crawls websites for red flags, deploys AI to analyze programs and personnel, and then strikes like a heat-seeking missile to send inefficient and sulfurous personnel, and in some cases, everything they do, into oblivion. Wow. You can tell right away where this guy's coming from, right? Well, he says Musk clearly loves to predict the Doge as a lean, mean efficiency machine. He says that, but it seems increasingly obvious that its efforts to reduce personnel levels and spending mostly reflect an ideologically that treats whole areas of government as illegitimate and completely arbitrary reductions in force as a valuable end in themselves. So basically what he's saying is they're not going after efficiency type stuff. They're just going after things that they don't particularly care for. He says it's obvious why Musk and his mega backers use the language of efficiency and sound business principles to justify its spending, suspensions, firings, and employee buyout deals. And he puts deals in quotes. In most cases, their legal rationale is an exercise in executive branch agency management rather than a usurpation of the congressional policy making that has shaped most of what bureaucrats do. Now, I'm going to stop there by saying that, I mean, this is what we're experiencing. A ton of bureaucrats. There's just bureaucrats everywhere, and they have way too much power. Doge is starting to expose some of that. But he continues by saying, but in reality, Doge's savings, he puts it in quotes, mostly fall into two brackets that have nothing to do with efficiency or rooting out waste, fraud, or abuse. One is via ideology-driven demolitions of activities and whole programs that Trump simply doesn't like. That's why Doge began. After it conquered the commanding heights of the federal government by taking on the Office of Personnel Management and in the General Services Administration, which control respectively federal human resources and physical assets, with a frontal assault on the USAID program. Frontal assault, you like that? that great symbol of woke internationalism at the expense of America First principles. Again, I don't understand the mentality like this guy has of how the waste that was in USAID, why you wouldn't want to go after that. Why is it just some ideological thing, right? But he says, and now DOGE is training its sights on the Department of Education, which Trump has promised to shutter. Trump's executive orders began banning DEI initiatives and any other kind of gender or race conscious policies or programs have enabled DOGE to dive into multiple agencies to force dismissal of personnel allegedly complicit in such evil activities. So yeah, of course. I mean, he's the head of the executive branch. Hello, he can hire and fire who he wants with under his purview. And he says waste, and again in quotes, or inefficiency has had nothing to do with it. Really, really? Because I kind of think it has. But he says it's all about ideology. I tend to disagree. I don't think it's all about ideology. Yes, there. I mean, obviously, DEI is something that it should not be in the federal government ideologically, right? But and he was elected in order to get rid of a lot of that garbage, and so he's doing so. But he says Musk has often talked about attacking fraud, but that's just a term MAGA folk use for whatever they oppose to ideological grounds, as the Washington Post's Aaron Blake has explained. And he has a quote here by this Aaron Blake guy by saying that Trump and Musk's efforts to disrupt the U.S. government and hamstring federal agencies are increasingly predicated on the idea that they're combating fraud. Trump and Musk used the word more than a dozen times in the Oval Office, and the Trump administration keeps citing fraud in defending itself in court. Quote, we have massive amounts of fraud that we've caught. This is what Trump said, except that they seem to be having trouble locating the actual fraud. I don't know about that. I mean, it's coming out daily, right? He says Trump would indeed seem to believe that many things he simply doesn't like or agree with are fraudulent, which helps explain the White House's posture right now. But that doesn't mean they are fraudulent. And that's a problem when you're using that as your justification for dismantling large portions of the government. So again, what do you mean they're not finding fraud? I mean, just the other day we talked about here on the podcast how there was one contract, in fact, that was a 3-month contract. That's the amount of time that they were to spend doing whatever job the contract had hired them for. It was 3 months. That was 20 years ago. And they have still been getting monthly checks for 20 years for a 3-month contract. But he's saying there is no such thing as fraud in the federal government? Really? Well, this guy continues. He says a second DOGE strategy represents mindless terminations of federal employees who are easy to fire, not those who are doing a particularly poor job. Okay, again, let's stop here for a second, because when on Biden's way out, okay, what he was trying to do on his way out, I mean, obviously the election's over with. There's a time period from that point till when he actually has to leave office. And what were they doing? His administration was just trying to hire as many people as they could with their ideology and put them into places that they thought they could not be gotten rid of. Well, that, I guess, isn't true, because they are being gotten rid of because they're the ones that are on probation. This guy says the employee buyout scheme, which was at best a limited success. Really? Because I think it was a pretty good success. In fact, it was successful enough that the union was suing to stop it, right? Because they were losing too many people. He says limited success got rid of people fearful their jobs would be eliminated, or who had built their lives around remote work, neither a sign of waste or inefficiency. I don't know, because there was lots of these people that were, and again, I'm not against remote work, But what I am against is there was no accountability for those remote workers. And so you had a ton of people that were doing other things when they were supposed to be working for the federal government. They were getting paid by the federal government, but there was nothing to hold them accountable. He says a second big DOGE target has been the termination of probationary employees, of which there are an estimated 200,000 across federal agencies. Again, these are the ones that Biden was trying to sneak in at the end there. These bureaucrats don't have civil service protection, so cashiering them avoids the kind of legal problems associated with long-term employees, particularly those with collective bargaining agreements. But there's no particular reason to think tossing them aside indiscriminately improves government efficiency. Well, I would say yes, it does, because again, they were put in for ideological reasons. He says, all along, Musk has been focused on adding notches to his belt, achieving pulled out of the air but impressive sounding amounts of alleged savings, rather than making government less wasteful or more accountable. It's not surprising for someone whose worldview is that a Silicon Valley billionaire who seems to have been equally influenced by video game warrior ethos and alien Rand style hatred of government as an instrument of wealth redistribution. Both were reflected in recent comments about beneficiaries of federal programming being parasites. And that's in reference to a meme you probably have seen about some gal who's like, I don't care if you're getting rid of these, as many of the federal workers being parasites. I don't know if I would classify them as that, but anyway, he goes on to say, so don't be too fooled by the smoke and mirrors of DOGE technological veracity in doing its job. At bottom, it's the same approach to the federal budget that knuckle-dragging conservatives, ideologues, have adopted at least since the Reagan administration. Like this low-tech predecessors, Musk regards even good government as inherently wasteful. I don't think he's said that, but a lot of government is wasteful. He says, which in turn makes efforts to improve what taxpayers get for their money a waste of time. What DOGE is doing could, in theory, be good, bad, or just mindless, but it's mostly a blast from the past rather than any sort of cutting-edge reform. I mean, again, I could probably not disagree with this guy more. I mean, this is crazy, and it goes along with the conversation that I had, and this guy was saying, how can you trust what DOGE is doing, and what they're saying to be true? And I said to him, well, worst case scenario, nothing really happens with DOGE. Maybe they're all lying about all this saving of the money and the finding of the fraud and all that kind of stuff. Well, then we're right back where we started from. It's no different than what we've experienced for the last few decades, right? I mean, come on, seriously, what is the harm? In fact, if you look, there's definitely been a lot of funneling of dollars to liberal and left-wing causes and people, and DOGE is now uncovering that, and they don't like it. It's not they are freaked out by it. They are going nuts over it, and they're trying anything and everything they can to say that DOGE is bad and that they want it to stop. Right? In fact, Simon Hankinson of the Heritage Foundation says Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is doing some digital archaeology into the dark closet of federal spending, and the skeletons they're turning up aren't pretty. He says, I've been writing for 2 years about the Biden administration's use of taxpayer money to facilitate illegal immigration, but I won't complain about headlines like Elon Musk said DOGE uncovered $59 million in payments for luxury hotels. He did. It's true. Even if Musk's work was more to publicize than to uncover. Thanks to Biden's open border and mass patrol programs, millions of aliens entered the U.S. border illegally over the past 4 years. Over the same time frame, Congress granted $31 billion to the Department of Health and Human Services to provide housing, medical, and legal services to these illegal aliens. But the Biden administration also actively worked to facilitate mass immigration and migration using the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, whose mission is to help disaster-stricken Americans, not aid illegal aliens. Via the Department of Homeland Security, the Biden administration channeled billions to FEMA, which in turn granted states, cities, and nonprofits money to transport, house, and care for illegal aliens. From fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2024, Congress gave FEMA's Shelter and Services Program $2.2 billion, with a B, for nonprofits and local entities to provide support to non-citizens released from DHS custody, which means to pay for illegal aliens released at the border. Now, in 2024 alone, FEMA set aside $640.9 million in shelter and service grants to enable non-federal agencies to offset allowable costs incurred from services associated with non-citizen migrant arrivals in their communities. The top recipients were Denver, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Massachusetts, New York, and Philadelphia. These are Democratic-run states and cities with sanctuary policies offering free housing and services to illegal aliens. Biden also used the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which is a FEMA grant program that's authorized in 1987 to help homeless veterans, to pipe another $1 billion into housing illegal immigrants. The $59 million DOGE just flagged was doled out as part of one FEMA grant to house illegal aliens in New York City in more than 200 jerry-rigged shelters that included formerly luxurious hotels like the Roosevelt. This isn't an anomaly. It's just the latest payment in a 4-year federal subsidy of sanctuary cities. And these FEMA grants are just one tool among many used by the Biden administration to fund an unauthorized taxpayer-funded mass migration system. We were paying for that open border. Officially, refugees who have been vetted and selected are supposed to enter the U.S. through the congressionally authorized U.S. Refugee Administration's program. Funded by the U.S. government, this USRAP already had a network of NGOs, which are non-government organizations, and charities such as Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, and Lutheran Refugee and Immigrant Services. And traditionally, these NGOs were paid to help bring in and resettle a fairly small annual number of refugees. The Biden administration took this existing NGO pipeline and supercharged it with billions of dollars of federal money, and these charities went from handling tens of thousands of cases per year to millions through many different channels and programs. In November of last year, retired Border Patrol Officer J.J. Carell told the flabbergasted House Homeland Security Committee that DHS was cutting checks for $600 million to Jewish Family Services alone every 3 months that year. Yes, $600 million every 3 months to that one NGO alone. Similarly, the government granted over $550 million to various Lutheran charities in the fiscal year of 2024, most of it for migration. Catholic Charities USA received $1.4 billion in federal grants in 2021 alone. Much of these taxpayer dollars went directly to the task of importing illegal aliens, importing them. We were shipping them into our country. Americans have seen the consequences of wide open borders, but might not have focused on the fact that it was done with their own money. DOGE's candle power can enlighten them. You see, this is what DOGE is doing. They're uncovering this type of corruption. And to have the mindset that, they're not doing any good is just burying your head in the sand. I mean, like, for instance, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Government Efficiency have cut tens of millions of dollars directed under former President Joe Biden to left-wing green groups. The Biden administration had awarded the funds through grants to a slew of environmental and activist groups. The grants totaled $77.1 million, but the EPA froze $67.4 million in payments yet to be made, according to the New York Post. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has welcomed DOGE officials into his agency to comb through spending programs and systems looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And the administrator touted the cuts to the environmental grants as just another example of wasteful spending ending with the Trump administration, he says. Quote, "We will make sure every penny spent by the EPA goes toward protecting human health and the environment and powering the great American comeback." He added, "I am proud to partner with DOGE to restore fiscal responsibility and accountability in our government." Now, Zeldin has spent much of his first weeks in the U.S. environmental regulator making cuts to the agency's spending and reshaping its priorities to the Trump administration. The EPA head has been attempting to claw back $20 billion in gold bars that he says the Biden administration hurriedly shoveled out to allies and friends ahead of the former president leaving office. The EPA chief said last week that $2 billion of the $20 billion identified was directed to be paid out to Power Forward Communities, a green group linked to Stacey Abrams. Yeah, and this group basically has no history of doing anything. Okay, they're just collecting the money for her. Quote, "I made a commitment to members of Congress and to the American people to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars, and I've wasted no time in keeping my word. When we learned about the Biden administration scheme to quickly park $20 billion outside the agency, we suspected that some organizations were created out of thin air just to take advantage of this." And this is exactly what happened with the Stacey Abrams organization. Quote, "As we continue to learn more about where some of this money went, it is even more apparent how far-reaching and widely accepted this waste and abuse has been. It's extremely concerning that our organization that reported just $100 in revenue in 2023 has chosen to receive $2 billion. That's 20 million times the organization's reported revenue." So, of course, it was an organization that was designed to launder this money. It was a depository for this money where it got it away from the government agency and the taxpayers' control. But DOGE, they were the ones that caught it, and now we're clawing it back. And Musk, he announced that all federal employees must detail their productivity from the past week or risk termination, further intensifying the Trump administration's campaign to shrink the federal government, because we need to shrink the government. There's just too many people involved in the federal government. This is what Musk wrote on X. He said, "Consistent with President Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they've got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. Consistent with President Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they've gotten done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation." Yeah. I mean, it's called accountability. We should try it sometime, right? Musk post comes hours after President Donald Trump applauded Musk on True Social, writing, "Elon is doing a great job, but I would like to see him get more aggressive. Remember, we have a country to save." This apparent audit comes after weeks of of the Musk-led Department of Government Efficiency slashing excess bureaucratic spending and firing thousands of probationary employees. We talked about the 77,000 government employees. That's 3% of the federal government's workforce resigned after accepting the now famous fork in the road offer from the Office of Personnel Management. That's per Politico. Federal employees across multiple departments, including those under the Department of Energy and the General Services Administration, have already faced probationary terminations in recent weeks as part of a broader effort to trim the DOGE deems unnecessary positions. The Pentagon announced plans to dismiss 5,400 employees, and the administration is moving to eliminate programs emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Great. As part of its broader push for federal downsizing. Legal observers are questioning whether Musk, in his capability as an administration advisor, possesses the authority to demand employee productivity reports under threat of dismissal. Why not? I mean, he can collect them, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Nevertheless, Musk appears to have the president's full support, and he will continue, by the way. A spokesperson for the Office of Personnel Management confirmed that Musk's plan is coming to fruition, with each employee reporting their productivity in the last week by Monday. And this is part of the Trump administration's commitment to an efficient and accountable workforce. This was the OPM spokeswoman, McLaurin Pinover, and she said that in the statement. Now, meanwhile, some lawmakers in Congress have expressed concerns that rapid downsizing could have some unintended consequences, yet no significant legislative pushback has materialized, indicating that the Trump administration's their campaign is likely to press forward, especially after several big court victories for DOGE this last week. And so, yeah, I mean, the Daily Wire is right here. I mean, he needs to press forward and needs to continue to do what he's been doing, because he's uncovering fraud at every turn. But I like what the Heritage Foundation said, and they said that that this really that DOGE is not an unprecedented thing. We've kind of see this a little bit before, but not doing it this well. They said, like spoiled children finally told no by their parents, bureaucrats and beneficiaries of wasteful government largesse are howling at the shockwaves the Department of Government Efficiency is sending through Washington. NBC News called it an unprecedented effort to shrink the federal workforce and slash federal programs. Unprecedented? Hardly. The idea of cutting waste and inefficiency out of the federal bureaucracy is nothing new, nor is the idea of looking to civilian business practices as models for improving administrative processes. Both were first proposed and implemented by President Dwight Eisenhower, the general who led the Allies in Europe to victory over the Nazi regime and successfully balanced the federal budget twice in his first term. In the 1952 elections, Republicans ran on a platform charging that the Democrats had arrogantly deprived our citizens of previous liberties by seizing powers never granted, and working unceasingly to achieve their goal of national socialism. Some things, it seems, never change, right? I mean, as Joanna Grinzinger of Northwestern University outlined in The Unwieldy American State, once Eisenhower was inaugurated, he moved swiftly to clean out the then scandal-ridden IRS and Justice Department, and he also sought to roll back federal interference in the matters that could be easily handled by the states. Eisenhower targeted growing problems with waste and inefficiencies, and with a three-pronged strategy. First, drawing from his military background, he sought to implement a military-like efficiency in the executive branch itself. Second, he successfully achieved both spending cuts and reductions in agency personnel. Of course, this led to agencies that they led to them complaining. Sound familiar? That they were being forced to do more with less. Oh no. And third, in a move foreshadowing DOGE, Eisenhower announced that he had created a 3-man committee named the President Advisory Committee on Government Organization. Eisenhower's DOGE was composed of Eisenhower's mother, Milton, Nelson Rockefeller, and Arthur Fleming. Rockefeller, as we all know, was a very rich, successful businessman. Sound familiar? While Fleming was then serving as the Civilian Service Commissioner. Milton Eisenhower recounted in his book, The President is Calling, that's the name of the book, that Eisenhower saw many federal programs as wasteful and inefficient. His goal with the committee, Milton said, was to receive recommendations on how to consolidate gains, improve the federal structure, and obtain full value for billions of dollars spent on fairly new social programs. Eisenhower would continue reform efforts throughout his administration, urging Congress to give the president more control over the executive office and executive staff, a problem that Trump still faces today, of course. But unfortunately, Eisenhower didn't attempt to change the administrative state itself. And that obviously has led to what we have today. But DOGE's goals are far from historical. But DOGE is novel in in a different respect. For perhaps the first time in the administrative state's history, America is looking to dismantle an, until now, unquestioned and unchecked bureaucracy. Yes, that's what they are. We have this unchecked bureaucracy that has been able to do basically whatever they want with just a slush fund of money that is not theirs, it's taxpayers, but they think it is, and they're able to spend it on whatever they feel they want to spend it on, and they can buy things for whatever they feel like they can spend the money on. So anyway, I would love to hear from you. I was a little bit dumbfounded by some of the opinions that I've seen recently. I think it's just they're freaking out over the transparency. But maybe you can come up with a better argument of why DOGE is a bad thing. I would love to hear from you on it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. And again, we're also on YouTube at this time. And thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.